Welcome everyone. Last week I covered how to critically appraise a qualitative study, and this week I'm covering how to critically appraise a quantitative research study. And I'm going to do this systematically using an open access research article to talk you through the key points. So I hope you find this video useful. So what does critical appraisal involve? It involves systematic approach, and there's two key things that you're appraising. You're assessing and evaluating the quality of the study, how it was conducted, and then its value to the area of interest and how it informs the current evidence base. So its generalizability, transferability. Where can the study findings be used? Are they generalizable to other clinical areas or to other patients and staff? So the findings from a experimental drug trial studying the effects of dementia medication, for example, are potentially generalizable to patients who have dementia, but not to the general population. Depends on the study. You are appraising the strengths and limitations of the study. You're assessing and evaluating the study's value, how rigorous the researcher was when conducting the quantitative study, and how reliable the study is. So reliability and rigor relate to the quality of the study, how exact and thorough and precise the researchers have been. Have they provided enough information to repeat the study, or are there key details missing from their research paper? So you're appraising the data collection and data analysis methods and procedures used. Did the researcher use validated measurement tools and statistical calculations? Ethical approval should also be clear to ensure patient participants were not coerced into taking part. Was a rationale given for the sampling procedures? And all of these procedures show that rigorous processes have been adhered to ensure the safety of participants, and that, so for example, confidentiality and anonymity of participants was maintained. Validity in quantitative studies links to accuracy of data collection, measurements and findings, and the researcher should detail how potential biases were mitigated. So for example, using random sampling across a population decreases sampling bias, or having accurate and validated measurement tools to collect quantitative data decreases measurement bias. And then you've got statistical calculations to ensure accurate results, and you've got peer reviews to reduce researcher bias when analysing results and writing up results. And this increases the credibility of the study and its trustworthiness, which means the quantitative study results are accurate, reliable. Also, the researchers should acknowledge limitations, and the researchers also need to present a balanced and objective view. So the findings and discussion should be objective and underpinned by references and set within the context of an evidence base. If you're conducting a critical appraisal as part of an assignment, you might want to read some critical appraisal tools and checklists. And there's over 80 research appraisal tools currently available to guide appraisal. And these checklists provide questions to help assess the strengths and weaknesses of the study. There's also a helpful and practical open access paper from Morley and Cathler, How to Appraise Quantitative Research in Evidence-Based Nursing. And it's open access, which means it's free to download, and it's clearly written paper. And it's helpful when you're looking for references to underpin the key points in your critical appraisal. Before you start your critical appraisal, you might also find my video on qualitative, quantitative and mixed method research helpful, as I explain the differences between those research approaches and the different data collection and data analysis methods that align with each research approach. And that's helpful to know so you can evaluate any misalignment, inconsistencies or confusion in the paper that you're critically appraising. It's helpful to go on the Critical Appraisal Skills Programme website. This website's world-renowned, and it hosts free checklists that includes checklists for systematic reviews, qualitative studies, randomised controlled trials, cohort studies, case control studies, diagnostic studies and economic evaluation checklists. If you need a mixed methods appraisal tool, an example here is from Hong et al. 2018. There is other tools out there. I've used this one and found it quite helpful. The full references are at the end of this talk. And this mixed method appraisal tool is helpful to appraise qualitative research, randomised controlled trials, non-randomised studies, quantitative descriptive studies and mixed method studies. So I'm going to be using extracts from this example open access paper to explain key pointers linked to the critical appraisal of a quantitative study. This paper is from BMJ Open and it's entitled Staffing Levels and Hospital Mortality in England, a National Panel Study Using Routinely Collected Data. The paper is authored by Rubo et al. 2023, and it's a really good example of rigorous quantitative research. This open access paper is free to download, and it's published under Creative Commons CC by 4 license. And so when I present odd extracts of the paper, I've made no changes to the original wording, and the full reference for this paper is given at the end. I also gained full authorization from the publishers to use the paper in my video. So this video is aimed at early career researchers and healthcare students. So I'm going to give a simple overview of some key pointers. So initially we're looking at the title, the abstract and the author of the paper, and we're appraising any strengths, weaknesses or inconsistencies across at the beginning on that abstract and title. So firstly, what is the intention of the researcher, and do the researchers make their intentions clear? What is the study aim, objectives? Is there research question or hypothesis? And it really depends on the type of quantitative study as to how the researcher deals their intention or their purpose of the study. Some quantitative studies test a hypothesis, some examine cause and effect and relationships across variables, between variables. So an hypothesis is when you start with a theory or a view and you test that theory by collecting data. An example hypothesis might be that drug A will reduce the progression of dementia, and then you're going to test that hypothesis using a drug trial. Another thing to look for is it clear where the study was conducted, who participated, for example, the country, setting, population, and is the study design and methods clear? So in quantitative studies, data collection is going to involve numbers and statistics. Example data collection methods include surveys using numerical rating scales, experiments or observations to test hypotheses, cause and effect, or predict changes. And data analysis in quantitative studies links to statistical calculations, and you use descriptive statistics or inferential statistics, which I'll explain in a bit more detail later. But descriptive statistics describe the characteristics of a quantitative data set, for example, using percentages. And with descriptive statistics, you don't make inferences about whole populations, you focus on those data sets. Whereas the inferential statistics, you do make predictions and inferences about whole populations, and it depends on what the purpose of the study is. Also in the abstract, do the findings and conclusions align with those aims and objectives, and are they discussed using an evidence base within the context of an evidence base? When appraising a research article, we also need to check that the journal is reputable and the article has been peer reviewed as part of that appraisal. Who are the authors? Are their roles, qualifications and appropriate for the study conducted, for example? So if we look at the open access paper by Rubo et al. 2023, entitled Staffing Levels and Hospital Mortality in England, a National Panel Study Using Routinely Collected Data. From the title, we can see that quantitative numerical data is being collected because it relates to staffing levels and mortality rates, which reflect numbers, and the study aligns to the quantitative research approach. We also know that the BMJ Open Journal is a world-renowned and reputable peer-reviewed journal found in library healthcare databases. The authors and their affiliations are linked to a School of Healthcare Science in a reputable UK university and hospital in Southampton. The UK researchers are also renowned and reputable, and several have published widely in this field. These researchers work in the health science field, which relates to the area under investigation, which again increases the credibility of the study. So if we appraise the abstract, and I'm sorry it's so small, if you want to download the abstract so you can see it a bit more clearly, it's open access and free to download. But if you look at the abstract, it's written with clear headings. The objective study is clear, which is to examine the association between multiple clinical staff levels and case mix adjusted patient mortality in English hospitals. So the intention of the researchers is transparent, along with where the study was conducted. The abstract also states the study design, which is retrospective observational study of routinely available data. The data collection procedures are presented, and 138 NHS hospital trusts provided data from 2015 to 2019. Outcome measures are given that include standardised mortality rates, which are collected from summary hospital level mortality indicator data sets. So essentially the researchers collected data that was readily available in hospitals, and staffing levels were calculated as the ratio of occupied beds per staff group. And there's different ways of calculating staffing levels, but this was their chosen method. Statistical analysis uses descriptive statistics to describe key characteristics of the data, and the researchers also use statistical modelling using multiple regression models to explore relationships between data sets. And regression analysis aligns with quantitative data analysis, and it's used to assess relationships between variables. So they used appropriate data collection and data analysis methods because they're examining the relationship between staffing levels and mortality rates. The results and the conclusions clearly align with what the researchers set out to achieve in the study, and the researchers found that allied health professional staffing levels may influence hospital mortality rates. It's important in any research paper when you're appraising that the researchers should present an introduction to the topic area. They need to give a rationale for their chosen area and for their study. And the open access paper did this very well. It presented up-to-date primary empirical research studies to give an overview of the current evidence base. So, for example, this is just some extracts. Studies focusing on the impact of clinical staff other than nurses on hospital mortality rates are relatively scarce. There are several studies on the effect of physician staffing levels, and they all indicate increased risk of patient death with lower medical staffing levels. It's really setting their study in the context of evidence base within other groups of professionals, such as physicians. And then a rationale is really given here. In the face of enduring staffing shortages in some professional groups, it's important to understand the likely consequences on patient care and to identify priorities. A focus on single professional groups risks unintended consequences through neglect of other important contributions to patient safety that might lead to bias estimates. We therefore aim to examine the associations between staffing levels of multiple staff groups and case mix adjusted patient mortality in hospitals. So they're really giving a rationale for why they've looked at multiple staffing groups in their study. So when we appraise the study design, methods and analysis, we need to know that the researchers have been rigorous, exact and transparent. The rationale for study design and methods should be justified. There should be clear sampling data collection procedures, detailed. There should be no inconsistencies found between the study design and data collection methods and analysis. And in this open access paper, it's all very clear and transparent, which I'm going to show you in a minute. The procedures and methods used are all detailed. Inclusion-exclusion criteria should be detailed to ensure reliability and that the study is objective. For example, the researchers in the open access paper make clear which data is included and excluded. They're clear about the time parameters for the retrospective data collected from the period 2015 to 2019. Ethical approval should be made clear and adherence to local and national ethical procedures. And that assures confidentiality, anonymity and no coercion of participants, depending on the study that you're appraising. Clear data analysis methods and processes, so you should be able to see that clear alignment from start to finish. So the researchers did what they said they were going to do, and you can clearly see that with the conclusions and the finding in the study. So in the open access article, it's evident that ethical approval was not required as the project relied on publicly available, routinely collected data. So any member of the public could essentially access that data. Usually when you appraise a research paper, you look on the ethical approval and it will have local and national approval, which will be required. But in this case, obviously it wasn't required. So to appraise quantitative research papers, you need an understanding of some of the key terms that are used. But don't be frightened of them. You need a basic understanding to understand what they mean. And you must remember that a lot of researchers will use software to digitally analyse their work. They'll have statisticians that will come in and check their work as well. And what you need when you're appraising is an understanding of what does this mean? What does this statistic mean? What does this term mean, which I'm going to give you. So firstly, descriptive statistics. When you see that term used, all it's doing is describing the key characteristics of a numerical data set. And data can be described as percentages, the mean or average, the median, which is the midpoint between a range of numbers. So you place your numbers in numerical order and it's the midpoint. The mode is the most commonly occurring number, and a standard deviation, and that's just a metric that shows how dispersed the set of numbers are. So how far or near the numbers are from your average. So a standard deviation is going to be high if you've got a real range of numbers that deviate away from your average, and a standard deviation will be low if they're near to your average. And when you use descriptive statistics, you're not making predictions or conclusions about a whole population. In comparison to descriptive statistics, inferential statistics, you can make generalizations. You can make inferences and predictions about a population, for example. And inferential statistics help to predict changes or differences between groups and establish relationships between variables. So it's important to be clear when you appraise a quantitative paper, what type of statistics are being presented in their results. In the open access paper, study researchers describe the numerical data. They have descriptive statistics, but they also found a relationship between staffing levels and mortality rates, so a bit of both. So if you're a student appraising a quantitative study, it's helpful to know the different methods you can use to analyse quantitative data, and it's to have an understanding of what these terms mean. You know, you're not necessarily going to be a researcher that's going to be doing these tests, but to appraise the paper, you need to know that there's alignment with the data analysis methods that they're using and what they mean. So I've just given you a simple overview here. So a t-test, if you see a t-test in a paper, they are comparing the averages between two groups of data. ANOVA is the analysis of variance, so it compares mean between more than two groups. Correlational analysis assesses the relationships between two variables, and this is what researchers did in the open access paper. They compared mortality rates and staffing levels. We've also got regression analysis, which assesses the relationship between variables, so like correlation analysis, but it goes that step further to understand the cause and effect. So when we appraise the quality of quantitative data, we're also appraising transparency, rigor, and there's three terms that are often used. And again, it's just having a basic understanding of why the researchers are using these terms and what does it mean for the data. So you're going to probably see the term confidence interval in many papers, or capital CI, which is normally 95%. And confidence in statistics is another way to describe sort of probability. You make lots of observations to get values, and then you have a set of values, and you've got your mean, your average, and you've got a standard deviation which tells you how dispersed the data around the mean is. Confidence interval is normally measured at 95%, and confidence in this is plus or minus 2 standard deviations. So the confidence interval is essentially showing you how accurate the mean value is. Probability p-values is a number calculated from a statistical test that describes how likely you are to have found a particular set of observations if the null hypothesis was true. So p-values are used in hypothesis testing to help to decide whether to reject the null hypothesis. So a high p-value is given here, and this means that the data supports a null hypothesis. A low p-value means the data does not support a null hypothesis. That's a basic understanding. Correlation coefficient ranges from -1.0 to 1.0 and measures the strength and direction between two variables. So a correlation of -1.0 shows a strong negative relationship. 1.0 shows a strong positive relationship between these two variables, and 0.0 shows no relationship between variables. So it's depending on what type of study you're doing, whether the study is looking at variables or looking at describing lots of values, and you're wanting to have confidence in those statistics, you know, as to what type of terms are going to be used in the study. But hopefully this gives you a basic understanding. When we look at the open access paper, here you can see the researchers are very clear about data sources, where they collected their retrospective data from. And their data sources included trust staffing, workforce data, bed availability and occupancy, data on the trust organisation and structure, and hospital mortality from the summary of a hospital level mortality indicator. The researchers were also very clear about statistical analysis. I can't get it all in here, but you can download the paper. But you can see that the researchers, for example, used descriptive statistics using mean, standard deviation to describe variables, and an interquartile range, which is 25% on either side of the median. They also used statistical modelling to explore the relationship between staff levels and mortality rates. And they discussed how they adjusted their statistical models to account for trust size, and they considered a range of statistical models. So you can see here we have a table presenting estimates as rate ratios for hospital mortality, and we see confidence intervals being used and p-values, which promotes rigor and accuracy and reliability in the study findings and results. On a simple level, you can see the standard confidence interval is 95%, and if you look at the first set of numbers on the table on the line bed per medical within hospital, you see the incident rate ratio is 0.98. You have a 95% confidence interval, so confidence that the value is between 0.97 and 1, which shows rigor in the data that they're presenting in this table. The researchers also explained how they identified the best statistical model to explore the relationship between staffing and mortality rates to meet the needs of the study. They state the best performing model, referred to as the main model, was a negative binomial random effects model because it included 8 clinical staff groups and hospital characteristics. And multi-level models were adjusted for trust size and affiliation as a teaching hospital, with trust including a random effect to adjust for clustering. So they ensured that the models were adjusted for the trust side. They offered a clear rationale for the models used and why the models were adjusted to promote accuracy. The researchers also promoted rigor in the study. They used statistical software to link, clean and code data, which assures more accurate findings and results. If we move on to the discussion and the key findings, you can see alignment with the study objectives at the start, which were to examine the association between staffing levels and mortality rates. And they found that after adjustment for hospital characteristics and including multiple clinical staff groups in their models, they found that higher medical and allied health professional staffing levels were associated with lower mortality rates in acute hospital trusts in England during the period 2015 to 2019. And these findings are discussed and placed in context with current empirical studies in the area, which is really good to see, and the research informs the current evidence base. So it's good to see both strengths and limitations acknowledged, as this promotes transparency and the reliability of the study. Strengths include the use of 4 years' worth of routinely available data, so over a large period of time, and the inclusion of different staff groups enabled them to estimate the effects of each staffing level on hospital mortality. And they also considered the hospital trust characteristics, such as the size of the trust. So the researchers trialled various models and selected one that met the needs of the study, which one the model that performed best on their data, and they give a really clear rationale why other models were too restrictive. Limitations are included. For example, researchers had to group some of the medical specialties when they were reviewing data across different staff, so they were unable to explore the grade or the experience of medical staff and registered nurses too. So in summary, you can see how I've been systematic with the appraisal. I've highlighted key texts. I've highlighted some key pointers to look for when you're appraising a quantitative study. You also need to justify your points and underpin them with appropriate references. This paper had lots of positives, but you might find some papers that have some missing details, or there might be some inconsistencies. But even with positive, you still need to have a reference to underpin the point that you're making. So for example, that data collection tools, data measurement tools, statistical analysis is clear. And if you've got references, you can then appraise whether it's positive or whether there's any weaknesses there. So do check out my other free videos. I've got lots of them on my YouTube channel. I've got one on critical appraisal of a qualitative study, critical analysis in essays, how to improve reflective essay writing, how to write in a third person, as just some examples. So if you're interested in the full reference for the open access paper that I used by Rubo et al., Staffing Levels and Hospital Mortality in England, a national panel study using routinely collected data, and that is open access a paper. Critical Appraisal Skills Programme, CAS checklist, you will find on the website for Critical Appraisal Skills Programme, and I'm not allowed to put the actual web link there because it takes you off YouTube. And then reference for Hong et al. For the mixed method appraisal tool, and then Morley and Cathala, how to appraise quantitative research in evidence-based nursing journal, and that is helpful for if you need some references, for example, to underpin your quantitative research appraisal. So finally, if you do have any questions, do put them in the YouTube questions. If you found this helpful, don't forget to give it a like on YouTube. And if you would rather ask me questions, you can personally, you can DM me on Twitter or on my website. And do check out my books. I've got a book, How to Thrive as a Newly Registered Nurse, and How to Prepare for Interviews and Develop Your Career.